Welcome back to Outside Views, and today I want to talk about failure. Not failure in the abstract, but a monumental self-inflicted national failure. Of course, once again I'm talking about Brexit, and why the blame for this entire fiasco falls overwhelmingly and squarely on one man, Boris Johnson. That's at least what people are talking about at the moment, leaving out somebody else. But for years, the political establishment, both those who drove it and those who had managed to manage the whole thing, have tried to make Brexit sound like a force of nature, an inevitable, almost biblical event that simply happened. But we can't let them get away with that any longer. Because this wasn't an act of God. It was an act of a politician, and the evidence now shows that the public is finally agreeing. A massive new survey has revealed that nearly 2/3 of people now believe Brexit has been an abject failure. And this is not just some fringe opinion. This is the solid, sobering reality that has set in almost a decade after the referendum. And here's the most striking data point. Of those who say Brexit has been a failure, an astonishing 80% point the finger of blame directly at Boris Johnson. Think about that for a moment. Only about 7 in 10 blame Nigel Farage, the man who spent his entire career championing the exit. The public has clearly decided that the architect of the fantasy is less culpable than the man who was in charge of the catastrophic reality. And why? Because Boris Johnson, more than anyone else, was the figure who took the lie and wrapped it in a mantle of national purpose. He wasn't just a high-profile campaigner, he was the man who delivered the infamous slogan, the one that claimed £350 million a week would be sent to the National Health Service instead of the European Union. That was the lie emblazoned on a bus that symbolized the entire campaign's reliance on simplistic, feel-good fantasy over economic reality. But the blame goes so much deeper than just the campaign trail. Johnson was the Prime Minister who won a massive election mandate in 2019 to get Brexit done. He had the power, the majority, and the opportunity to negotiate a deal that might have shielded the country from the worst economic damage. Instead, he negotiated a rather hard break, pulling the UK out of the EU's single market and customs union, choosing a path of maximum divergence and therefore maximum friction, because it was the politically easiest way to deliver the hardline fantasy he had promised. The public is holding him accountable now, not for the vote itself, but for the economic poison he deliberately built into the final deal. And that economic poison is the heart of the matter. Of the 2/3 of the public who now call Brexit a failure, 57% cite the damage it has done to the economy as the primary reason. And the economy is what broke the promise. The current government, having finally conceded this reality, is increasingly upfront about the dire state of the nation's finances being a direct result of leaving the EU. And we are seeing the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, preparing a budget where she is widely predicted to have to either raise taxes significantly or break her own fiscal rules, and she is warning that Brexit has had an even bigger impact on the economy than critics ever predicted. And she's right. The official economic analysis is now incontrovertible. The Office for Budget Responsibility has calculated that the post-Brexit trading relationship will reduce the UK's long-run productivity by 4% relative to what it would have been inside the EU. And 4% is not a statistic. It's a permanent, ongoing reduction in the nation's potential wealth. It's a loss of tens of billions in economic activity every year, and it's a fundamental driver of the huge fiscal hole that is forcing the current tax hikes. And the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has warned that Brexit will have a negative impact on economic growth for the foreseeable future, noting that the UK's potential growth rate has declined significantly over the past 15 years. That's a period heavily influenced by the pre- and post-referendum chaos. And this is the legacy of the Johnson deal. Higher prices for consumers due to new trade friction, and crippling bureaucratic costs for businesses facing endless red tape and border checks. Naomi Smith, the chief executive of the commissioning group for the poll, said it quite perfectly. Politics is finally catching up with both public opinion and economic reality. She calls Brexit an abject failure, and that is the only rational conclusion one can reach from the evidence. So, the blame shifts to Johnson because he was the one who had the responsibility to turn a political slogan into a workable national strategy. He promised sunlit uplands and delivered a bad deal built on the principles of total sovereignty at any cost. And he chose the most disruptive form of Brexit possible, outside a WTO Brexit, and by being outside the single market, outside the customs union, because he saw it as a personal triumph, his political trophy, without regard for the economic cost. Farage was the protest leader who set the fire. Johnson was the prime minister who signed the papers, handed the keys over, and then, with his infamous deal, made the fire economically devastating. He is blamed because he was the one who was meant to govern, the one who was meant to negotiate, and the one who had to take ownership of the mess. When he won his majority on the promise to get Brexit done, he sealed his fate. The moment the process was done, the responsibility for the outcome became his, and no amount of retrospective spin can change that. And the sheer arrogance of his approach, the dismissal of any expert who warned of the economic damage, and the constant prioritizing of political self-interest over the national interest is what resonates with the public now. They see the crippling economic stagnation, they see the forced tax rises, and they see the reality of an international trade deal that is fundamentally an act of economic self-harm. They are looking for the person who made the promise and then, crucially, was given the power to implement it. And that person is Boris Johnson. And his massive majority in 2019 was his ultimate undoing because it gave him and no one else to blame for the deal he delivered. And this is a profound political lesson. The public will forgive a political lie in a campaign eventually, but they will not forgive the leader who then takes power and uses it to cement the lie into permanent, painful economic policy. The public is demanding a reckoning, and they are rightly placing the primary blame where the ultimate executive authority lay. The time for pretending this was anything other than a colossal politically driven mistake is over, and the time for holding the architect of this mistake fully to account has finally come too. But still, even if the people are right in that point, they should not forget the role Nigel Farage played with all the promises he's making now in his campaigning. And I still cannot believe, after people realizing all of this, that the polls for the next general election really look the way they look right now. And if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen.